Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we have Caleb Palmquist on, who is a successful indie comic writer. And we're going to be talking all about how you got here, Caleb, and what it took to become successful. And I'll just give a quick introduction before we get started, which is that Caleb has been a very long time friend of mine since I don't know. It's been at least a decade, more than that. But anyways, we worked together at the Writing Center, as many of my great friends. That's how we all met, and we've had really similar journeys. Except I went the novel path, and Caleb did comics. But we do a lot of really similar things, and he's been my go-to guy for a really long time. If I have Kickstarter frustrations, if I have any sort of mostly Kickstarter frustrations. I feel like I'm like, Caleb, my Kickstarter isn't approved and it launches in 2 days and it's going to be late. And so he's got to hear all of my complaining about those sorts of things. But we get to collaborate a lot and talk about what's working well for us and give each other tips and tricks and ideas. Um, but also, I think, did a really similar path of doing a lot of writing at the same time. We started publishing around the same time. We both had some early failures that really kind of, I think, shaped who we became in as writers and in our careers. And so we're just going to talk about all of that. And Caleb, I'll go ahead and give you the floor here, let you introduce yourself. I would love if you could just tell everyone really the story about how, you started, how you got started in publishing, how comics have been going, and where you're at now.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. And like you said, my name is Caleb. We met, I think, in 2010, so that's like 14 years ago. Um,
We're old,
and
Caleb.
so,
We're getting old.
yeah, yep. And so I am a comic book writer. Um, s- about 8 years ago, I started writing comic books. I had always sort of wanted to, but then about 8 years ago, I decided to just kind of go for it. And I saw other people were doing this kind of thing on Kickstarter, and so I decided to start making books and putting them on Kickstarter. And so I did one, I think, in 2017. And then 2019, I did a couple. And then after that, I really picked up the pace and started doing a lot of Kickstarter campaigns. And so I've done, I believe, over 20 now,
Oh my gosh, are
Kickstarter
you serious?
campaigns. Yeah.
That is so
And
many.
yeah. And I write fantasy and sci-fi. I'm best known for my series Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's about a unicorn who hunts vampires with his horn. Um, and and I've done a number of other projects, but yeah, I mean, like you said, it wasn't always successful. I kind of had my early stumbles and my later stumbles also, just kind of figuring out how to how to make things work and what works and what doesn't. And yeah, and you're right, we were really kind of along the same time. Like you launched your first Tally campaign, right around the same time that I was first getting introduced to Kickstarter. And then, um, yeah, I mean, certainly I think I've done uh quite a few more campaigns, but also, you know, it I think, yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely been a cool journey because you're one of several people who I kind of started out with around the same time on Kickstarter, and we
Mhm.
kind of like grown and learned together. And I just love the community because everybody's just sharing, tips and tricks and what works and what doesn't. And so
Yeah.
it's been super
And
exciting.
one of the things I'm most excited to talk about today is the early failures, because I think you have a particularly inspirational story. But before we talk about failure, like, let's talk about success. Because you have been what I consider very successful for anybody, but specifically for being an indie comic publisher. Will you tell us a little bit about how do you define success, and what would you say has been your most successful campaign to date?
Well, I would say anything that's successful for me on Kickstarter is something uh, that pays for itself. I mean, early on, I was losing money on every campaign. I mean, I was just trying to get stuff out there. And now, I would say from a financial point of view, if a book is making me any money at all, that's a huge success. And then, but also just like if it's something people are excited about, if I put out a book and then I put out the sequel to that book or the second issue, and people, like have a high percentage of returning backers and people messaging me asking about the next one. That's I think where it's like a big success for me. I want to know that people like what I wrote, because Kickstarter can be a real FOMO machine. I mean, it can be all about hype,
Mhm.
and you can have projects where, people are the most hyped about it during the campaign and they haven't read it. I mean, it's like this often the same with novels. It's like you're backing a campaign because you think it looks cool and the story sounds good, and it could suck. You like, but the way that you know that you hit with an audience is that they came back, because if they read your first book and they're coming back, that's when they read it and they liked it, and they want more.
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, my real metric. And then as far as what's my most successful campaign, I mean, my most successful series to date has been Unicorn Vampire Hunter. And my most successful project, I raised $27,000 a couple of years ago for issue 1 through 5 of that
Ooh.
series. But the campaign that I have going right now actually broke a record for me for the most backers on day one, which is my new series that I actually wrote with my wife, Lorelai Jonason. It's called Dragon Grit, which is a fantasy western where people ride dragons instead of horses.
That's super exciting. And I definitely want to talk more about Dragon Grit and the current campaign. Um, Gosh, how many backers did you have on your first day?
I had 233.
Two. Wow, that is a lot. Do you feel like I think my metric is on my first day, I usually expect to raise about a third of what I'll get during the campaign. Do you feel like that has been kind of what resonates with you as well? Or
It kind of has changed over time a little bit, because I think the classic advice for going back years has been, if you can get to a third of what you need on day one, then you'll get there.
Mhm.
I s- Sometimes I wonder if that's changing a little bit, because I like a few years ago, you could expect your final 48 hours to be like almost as good as your first 48 hours.
Mhm.
And I think that that's less true now. And I don't know if that has to do with just the way Kickstarter promotes campaigns on their own website, or like reader habits, or people getting more used to Kickstarter. I will say with my own audience, I feel as though I'm getting more and more people who jump on early. Um, and maybe that's just sort of how I've like sort of taught my audience to interact with the campaigns. But I find that the end of campaign push tends to be less intense than it used to be.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm having more success early, which I think can be a good thing. But yeah, I mean, I would say generally day one is about a third of what I make. I think it also, one thing that I look for is how much momentum am I carrying, because I have had campaigns where I get a lot of returning backers and I have a decent day one, and then it like totally flatlines like almost immediately.
Uh-huh.
And that tells me like I got my loyal readers who really want to more stuff from me, who are going to support that, but it's not like appealing to new readers.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that what I'm really looking for in a campaign is not just day one, but what's day two, three, four look like? Am I continuing to have momentum? And if I am, then that's a really good sign, because that means I'm having discoverability, and new people are finding me.
Yeah, and it's cool that I mean, after running 20 Kickstarter campaigns, I'm sure that you've really learned how to read those numbers and see how that translates into audience interest and probably use that to, you know, build your next campaign and know what's going to work and what's not. And you've done a really good job of something that I have not done so much. You get everybody to almost commit before the campaign starts. You've got the, what is it called, where you get them?
So there's a couple of tools that I use. One is just native to Kickstarter, which is the pre-launch page. So
Mhm,
if you haven't run a Kickstarter before, they didn't always used to do this. In fact, when you and I started on Kickstarter, this wasn't a thing. But now there's a pre-launch page. So if you get approved, you can actually put it's all it is like your image and a short description and then a button that says notify me on launch. And so I usually try to have that up like a month before the actual launch and to get people signed up. And they're not necessarily like committing to it, but what they are committing to is that they'll get an email when the campaign launches. And then they also get a campaign in email when they hit 48 hours left, 24 hours left, and 8 hours left, assuming they haven't backed it yet. They'll get
mhm,
those reminder emails. So basically, you're like, if someone hits that button, they're going to get several emails from Kickstarter um, that remind them like this is happening, which
mhm,
is really great because one thing about getting people to buy something in general is, I mean, this I think is just like sort of classic advertising advice is that people need to see something like 5 to 10 times
mhm,
before they like really like, you know, it becomes a like inceptioned into their head that they want to like buy that, like for a lot of people, like, or at least some people, it'll work to just if they see it one time and it's exciting to them. But also, I'm sure you can relate. Sometimes you see something that seems cool to you one time and then you forget about it. You
mhm,
know, it's like, oh, I see an advertisement for a video game and it says it's going to come out in 2026, and I'm like, it just is like it's cool, but like it means nothing to me right now, and then I just forget. And
mhm,
then it's kind of on that company that's putting out that video game to remind me when it comes closer, or like, and that's why like using video games example, like whenever there's a game coming out on Steam, they say wish list it now, right? Because if you wish list it on Steam, then when it comes out, you'll get an email.
mhm.
And so that's kind of what the pre-launch page is. And then the other tool that I use is BackerKit. BackerKit Launch is like a really great tool that essentially emails everyone who's ever backed one of your campaigns,
Mm.
and sends them an email and gets them to sign up for that pre-launch page. And then throughout the campaign, you can send more emails, and it automatically selects out people who have already backed the campaign.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't realize it could do that.
Yes. So basically,
Wow.
so I sent out for my current campaign 4 days after I launched, I sent another backer kit email, and it didn't send one to anyone who already backed it. So I don't have to worry about like annoying people who already backed it. Um, and they're effective. I mean, when I sent out that one 4 days after it launched, like within an hour of sending that out, I got 10 more backers. It's like a very effective tool. And so yeah, I mean, so much of it is like there are people out there, like assuming that you have a good product, there are people out there who want it, but they might not know about it or they might have forgotten about it. And like one thing I hear from people all the time, like people who are launching Kickstarters who haven't done it before, like how do I post about this or let people know without being annoying? And I'm
Mhm.
like, don't worry about being annoying.
Right.
Like if they're not interested, they'll ignore it.
Mhm.
Um, but if you don't remind people, then they're not like, I mean, because all the time I get people messaging me like a day after the campaign. It's I'm late. Can I still get this? And fortunately now I have a great system because I use BackerKit after the campaign as well for the pledge surveys.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so I have a pre-order campaign. So it's like a month after or however, whenever I'm ready to like start fulfilling, I send out the survey. I don't use Kickstarter surveys. I use BackerKit surveys. And then that also opens up a pre-order page where people can just order the book who missed the campaign. Um, and that's like a really great tool. So it's kind of about developing this whole like ecosystem of getting people's attention and getting them involved ahead of time, and then catching them on the back end as well. Because there's just so many opportunities where people want to support you, and they might forget or they might not be able to right then or whatever.
Yeah. So Caleb, your marketing strategy has really evolved over the years and come so far. And I mean, it's really clear in how well you do and how well you reach people. Both of our campaigns now reach so many more people than they did in the beginning, which, a lot of that has just been years of building up our audience. But that brings us back to both of us, our writing has also really improved over the years too. So before, I'll talk first about where my initial, what I consider failure was, is that when I very first finished Secrets of the Tally, it was not good. I was way overconfident, and I thought it was great. And looking back at it now, I just want to die that I ever even showed it to anybody. It was so rough. Um, but that was my initial wake up call of when I first queried it. I sent out 100 queries to 100 agents, and I didn't even get like a single personalized response with any interest at all. And so that was my moment of, wow, this is something is not working here. And for me, what I did is I spent the next 7 years rewriting it. And this is not an exaggeration. I rewrote Secrets of the Tally, or sorry, it's on that side. I rewrote that 26 times before I came back and published, and it needed it. It really did. Um, and so I know that both of us have come a really long way in our writing. And I was hoping that you could tell the story of your own perseverance. And I have to tell everyone before we had this call, I was like, Caleb, are we allowed to talk about this? Like, are you okay talking about where it went wrong in the beginning and how you evolved from that? Because um I think there's something more powerful about your story because you didn't just jump in and have immediate success. So why don't you tell people the story of really, how your first Kickstarters and your first comics went down?
Sure, yeah. So, the first Kickstarter that I did was called A Small Favor, and it was a sci-fi comic that I co-created with a friend of mine. And um, we had no idea what we were doing. We are just like sort of cutting our teeth on both creating comics, writing comics, and doing Kickstarter. Didn't really know what we were doing, trying to rely on like friends and family. And the I did that book, and it was a graphic novel. It cost a lot of money, and I raised like $3,000, and only because my friends and family were like supporting me, really. And I definitely like lost a lot of money, like went into some credit card debt in that creating that book. And It was way too big of a project. But like I went hard at it. Like I went to like a ton of conventions. I was trying to promote it. I did, the one Kickstarter, and then 2 years later, I did another Kickstarter, um, for a sort of like a one-shot prequel comic to it, that did better. But I still wasn't really I wasn't figuring out how to really capture an audience. And then I ended up doing a third installment that just didn't fund on Kickstarter, and I let it go to the end, and it failed, and people just like people weren't connecting with it. And what I realized, I mean, of course, the idea of like, killing your babies, and like you get really attached to something. It's like you said, like with the tally, it's like, you at that point when you had your first version, I'm sure that at the time you thought it was genius,
I
right?
did.
Like,
Oh, I did.
yeah. And that's kind of how I felt about A Small Favor. I really thought that like, oh, this is a sci-fi epic that's gonna like redefine sci-fi and all this stuff. And it just honestly, like looking back, I still have some copies, but it just wasn't that good, and it was very amateurish attempt. But I had to learn, we have to learn by making things. And I was also cutting my teeth on Kickstarter and promoting, and I didn't know what I was doing. But um what happened when that first Kickstarter failed, um, was that I really like took a look at what I was doing, like what was working, what wasn't, and instead of having the mindset of like I know what I'm doing, I'm gonna keep charging ahead, and I'm just gonna relaunch this project with a lower goal or something like that, is I was like, what's actually working here and what's not. And I wasn't at that point, I wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna throw this in the trash and I'm not gonna do it anymore. It was like, I'm gonna put this on the shelf. put this on the shelf and I'm going to try something else with a different approach. And I'm going to look at Kickstarter. I'm look what other people are doing, in terms of how they're promoting it, how they're building their pages. And I wanted to try a totally different comic. And that's when I ended up doing my book, Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which, which ended up being very successful. I mean, the first issue was, um, what I would probably consider now to be like a really like middling, like meh result. But at the time, it was like amazing. Like I raised like $9,500. I was like really excited. I got like a decent amount of backers, um, and so uh, kind of taking the time to step back and say, this concept's working, not working. It's not connecting with people. The way I'm promoting it isn't working. And just like trying to learn from other people doing what other people are doing and trying something different. Really kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities of what was possible. And the cool thing is that while a small favor is now kind of in the vault, as it were, I didn't completely leave it behind because I ended up adapting a lot of the concepts in it and some of the characters into another book that I did later on called Vampire Detective in Space, which, is, for people who have been following me since the beginning, is just a small favor, but like with vampires. But I just like, I kind of figured out a little bit better, like how to market it and like what, and also in terms of just it's a better written comic. It makes more sense. Um, and, because when I first wrote that first book, I was like, okay, I'm setting up a mystery here that you're not going to find out the answer to until volume 10. And like, and it was like, but what am I doing? What am I doing? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, but I'm very open uh, about failure because failure is an important teacher. And if the first thing we tried every time worked and then we just like kept doing it, like, maybe if that's you, then maybe you're just a genius and you know what you're doing. But I think failing is such an important thing to do because you're like, you gotta learn what works and what doesn't. Um, and Yeah, so, and it wasn't the last time either. Earlier this year, I had another project that I ended up canceling. It was a new project called The Tiger Who Would Be King. Was
Okay.
a project that I launched in January, and it flatlined. It's like I said, that was one of the projects where like some loyal backers came around at the beginning,
Mhm.
and like 120 of them or something, and then it just totally flatlined. So
Mm.
like it was only the most like hardcore of my kind of followers who really were into it, and then like, and even a lot of the other people who are like day ones like weren't interested, and then like it really didn't grow. And I was like, and I thought the art was cool, it was a partnership with an artist, and like, but it, and to be honest, when I later looked at it, I was like, this was rushed. It wasn't it Some things were unclear about it. My intentions behind the project weren't super clear, and I just like wanted another project to push out. And while I might revisit that someday with like better intentions, I think that, the things that hit for me are the things that like stories that I really believe in, um, that I'm proud of. Um, and so, like, while it was important for me to like look at what was working and what wasn't, it was, well, now at this point in my career, it's like when I'm taking on a new project, I have to really ask myself, like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Is this a story that I absolutely believe in and that I like, and that I would want to read?
Mhm.
Um, and So, I think, if you're asking like sort of what I've learned from failing, I mean, is that first of all, is that failure is going to happen. Like, no matter what, that's just going to happen. Not everything you do is going to work.
Hmm.
And also, no one at any point is immune from failure. Um, like I thought at the beginning of this year, I was kind of like, I thought I was invincible. I thought I'm doing a new thing and people will back it because it's me and because like I make good stuff. And while I think that comic would have been good if I had made it, it just like there were some missteps and it wasn't connecting. So, um, you know, and I mean, you look at all sorts of famous creators, like movie directors, writers, sometimes they have things that just don't hit.
Hmm.
And and so, you got to be vigilant and like be true to yourself in terms of like what's working. And then I'm sort of rambling here, but uh I would say like the last thing I would say about failure is like don't be afraid of admitting failure. And the reason for that is that like okay, at the beginning of this year, I had some people tell me you should not cancel your Kickstarter campaign because that looks bad. It's gonna be a stain on you. Okay, a month later, I had my most successful launch ever. So, I mean, I think that, sometimes knowing when to throw in the towel and say either I need to leave this behind or I need to find a different angle here is really important. And I think that while I think the value of finishing things is important, I also think that if you're holding on to something that's not working because you want it to work, even though all signs are pointing to the contrary, then you're just hitting your head against a wall. You're wasting
Yeah.
your effort and your time.
Well, and I think it's pretty impressive that you've been able to let go of those things, but you have always pivoted to new ones. And I mean, now I think is a little bit different because you know that you have such a great base and you know that your next project, like as long as it's hitting right, is going to do well. But in the beginning days, you didn't know that. And I
That's
I
true.
I want to know where did you find that tenacity to come back and do another campaign after that failure in a small favor? Um, Especially knowing that you did have to take out credit card debt, you were losing money on those. How did you find the strength to come back and do it again, when it wasn't going well for you to start with?
Well, I would, to be honest, when I launched Unicorn Vampire Hunter, I was like, if this doesn't work, then I I wouldn't say I was thinking I was going to give up on doing comics, but I certainly thought like I'm gonna have to take a step back because like you said, I was in debt. I needed a way to like climb out of that and I there's only so much money you can lose on something before you have to be like, it's just like um and I was like 25 and like I didn't have a lot of money just to lose. Um and so I guess I just really wanted it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to make comics. Uh and and so, I thought what am I guess I thought what am I waiting for? Like what if I don't try again and if I don't keep trying, then I might as well just stop and just like uh, be a consumer and not be a creator, like which is an okay thing to be, but it's not what I want it to be.
Mhm.
I wanted to make things. That's like really what drives me is I like so it's like a need, you know, to
Oh,
make
I do.
things.
I sure do. And
And yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say Unicorn Vampire Hunter was I like it was destined for greatness. It's a unicorn who hunts vampires with his horn. Duh. Like, isn't that your
Yeah.
subtitle on it?
Yeah.
And it's just been no wonder that it did so well. And also, I just remember the difference between your first comics and then picking up Unicorn Vampire Hunter. Your characters just they came to life on the page. It was so exciting. So that series has gone so well for you because the writing was so good, people have to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And that I want to take that into what you're doing now. Tell us about Dragon Grit. This is the campaign that you're running right now, and by the time this video comes out, you guys, if the campaign is still going, I think you said it ends April 5th, right? Of
April 5th.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's 2024 right now. So if you guys are seeing this while his campaign is still going, click the link below. We would love for you to, go check it out. But even if you're watching this at a later date and the campaign's over, go follow Caleb anyways, because as you can see, he's super prolific. He's always coming out with comics. You want to, and you can be one of those people who gets his emails that notifies you when they're happening. So even if you just want to follow him for motivational purposes, so that, when you're like, oh, I don't know if I can put something out this year, you're going to see Caleb doing like 5 issues. It's, I think, very helpful and very motivational to follow people who are doing similar things to what you're doing. But Caleb, tell us all about Dragon Grit. And is Lorelai around? Would she be able to come join us, actually?
I think she's still in her meeting, unfortunately.
They've
But
got some serious drama going down with the HOA. So
that's right.
Lorelai's putting them all in their place, I hope.
I hope so. I hopefully maybe next another time she can come on.
We'll have her on
Um,
another time for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So Dragon Grit is a comic book that I wrote with my wife. It's the first time we've collaborated, and she's a novelist. And she loves fantasy, especially especially anything involving dragons. And I love westerns. I've never written a western before, but I've always loved westerns. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour books and watching western movies, and like Tombstone is my favorite movie. And so um one of the things we bonded over was early on in our relationship was writing, and um, wanted to write something together for a long time. And so we thought, why not merge our two favorite genres like westerns and fantasy, and so obviously there's been a lot of fantasy westerns before, but I think I'm hoping this idea is somewhat unique about sort of cowboys that ride dragons. And so it's a western, but it's a world where people ride dragons. And the story is about Vera, who is an ex outlaw who's trying to make a living delivering packages out west, but she's kind of losing work because railroads are going out west now, and there's less demand for that sort of thing. And so she ends up taking on a job escorting essentially a city slicker who's inherited a dying dragon. The dragon keeps trying to run away, and he doesn't know why. So he hires her because she immediately figures out that this dragon is a wild dragon who's trying to go back to her um to the dragon graveyard that like her ancestors would go to. It's sort of like elephants have elephant graveyards, like they remember where to go to
Mhm.
die. um and so in our world, wild dragons would go uh to their dragon graveyard, and this is like a very old dragon that's been in their family for a long time. But the dragon has a bum wing, it's old, it can't fly anymore, so they have to go by foot. And so they go across dangerous wilderness. It's a travelogue story, and all the while they're being pursued by an old rival of Vera's, um, who runs a dangerous gang, and they all ride dragons, obviously. And so it's like a travelogue adventure book that's got a lot of characters and heart, and a lot of cool dragons. Uh, and yeah, that's kind of the long pitch, but the short pitch is it's cowboys who ride dragons. Um, so yeah, it's a brand new book. First issue, and it's being illustrated by Kay Woolheiser, who is the very talented artist who worked with me before on a King Arthur book that I did
Mm-hmm.
um, last year, and that was very well received. And I asked her to come on for this new series, and she agreed, and she's doing a great job. And so yeah, that's the book.
That that's really exciting. And I have not actually gone on and purchased my copy yet, so I'm gonna have to do that after we get off the call today. But I'm really excited that sounds like such a fun story. Westerns, dragons, and just knowing your writing style and just seeing how far you've come, I already know that it's going to be really good. So I'm really excited to see it. And Caleb, before we jump off today, do you just have any last minute advice for anybody who is an aspiring comic writer? What is the one thing that you would tell them just before we end our show?
I think the best advice I ever got about comics is that the way you learn how to make comics, whether you're a writer or an artist, the way you learn to make comics is by making comics. I mean, I think that probably the same, I've never written a novel, but I think the same is probably true about writing a novel. And that's probably how hopefully eventually I'll get over my psychological barrier and write a novel of my own. But, I assume that the best way to learn how to write a novel is by writing a novel, like doing it. And
Mhm.
so if you want to write a comic, just do it, and even if it's bad, do it anyway, because then you learn. And I mean, that's how I learned. My first graphic novel, I do not think is good. Like, I think, plenty of people say, "Oh, it was actually good." I'm like, "Okay, I appreciate the flattery, but like really it was not my best work." And that's okay because I had to learn. And hopefully don't follow my mistake of like spending a crap load of money on a whole graphic novel. Maybe start with a smaller project. But um, you know, if you want to do it, you got to do it. Read read comics that you like, and then just start doing it, writing them. If you like, find someone to work with. If you can't find an artist to work with, or you don't have money to work with an artist, try drawing it yourself. At least you'll get that experience of of kind of working out the process of how to do it. um, so yeah, I would say just jump in. Now's the time. However old you are, whatever place you're at in your life right now, if you want to do it, the time is right now. Nobody is gonna magically show up at your door one day and say, "Okay, you have permission to go ahead and do it now." You're the only person who can give yourself permission. So,
I think
you
that
know,
is really great advice. The time is now. You guys have heard it. Go check out Caleb's campaign for Dragon Grit. And if you're watching this at a time when the campaign's already over, go check him out anyways. Follow him on Kickstarter. And thank you so much for coming on, Caleb. This has been a lot of fun. And I cannot wait to see how this campaign goes for you.